U.S. crop conditions among the best ever. There's still a probably outside possibility of these kind of yields, but I think it's really outside. But the point is, we're going to raise more corn and soybeans than we've ever raised before. We'll talk about some specifics. So we got the lowest corn prices since 2010. We have the lowest. We're going to have the lowest soybean meal prices since 2012. If you're in the cash grain business, your ethanol/gravy train is over. I think that's kind of behind us here, except in some circumstances. We'll talk about that. Lean hog futures, August, still around 115, above $86 all the way through next year. Now, everybody's lamenting how much lower that is than 2 weeks ago. Think about this, okay? $114 and $86 on a carcass weight basis, and those were much higher just a few weeks ago. Still all-time record high U.S. revenue. The U.S. dollar is still half of what it was in 1984, and only about 13% higher than it was at its bottom during the recession. So trade remains positive. So conclusion number one is that I think even this guy would have a tough time screwing this up. Okay? Conclusion number two is that I'm pretty confident that this guy could. Now, I want to make a disclaimer. I'm a member of no organized political party. I am a Republican. So I'll let you think about that for a minute. Okay. All right. This is kind of how I feel. All right. So juggling chainsaws. There are a lot of moving parts to this marketplace this year. And, you lose an arm every now and then. It's probably good so that we can't say on the other hand as economists, but still, this is kind of the way it's felt this year as we've gone through this year. And I know it's the way many of you felt the same way. If you're out there fighting PEDV, you feel like you're juggling chainsaws too. So I know I'm not alone in that. Key issues, okay? We've touched on number one here early on, and that's grain prices. Obviously, grain prices much better than they have been on the buy side. Are the bad times really over for good? And by and large, they are. We can still have some circumstances we'll be in a bind again, but I think we've kind of caught up with this thing, at least in the short run here. And I think even for the 5 years out, I'm not too concerned about that. We're not going back to $2 corn and $180 bean meal, but we're probably not going to habitually be at $7 corn and $550 bean meal either. Demand, can we make this last? It's been the unsung hero of these markets the last couple of years, and it's really been a factor that I had not factored into this year. I don't think any analyst had factored the kind of demand that we've had. Some good reasons for that. Beef and chicken supplies, biofuels, drought, production challenges, they've really had some impact. And of course, hog supplies is PEDV. Let's look at costs. This was in June. In June, of course, last year was in the books, 93, 95, record cost of production. I use the Iowa State University's production parameters and just do a prediction model using corn and soybean meal prices to come up with these. At that time, forecast for this year was about 82. Forecast for next year was 77. Here's what it looked like this week. $80 for this year, $70 for next year. Okay? So significant improvements in this cost forecast as we're looking forward, and a few reasons. Number one is the world corn situation is much better than it was. We have record high production, record high consumption forecast by USDA. We have the highest projected year-end carryout stocks in 15 years on corn. Okay, a big deal. If we look at outside of the U.S. production, it's gone up by almost 50% since 2004. The majority of the world's corn is produced outside of the United States now. It used to be produced inside the United States, and a big chunk of that is now produced in the Southern Hemisphere, which gives us this seasonal kind of counterbalance that we've always had on the soybean side, and so that's an important thing going forward. If we look at USDA's June 30 reports, this is quarterly stocks. Their June 1st stocks here, significantly higher than a year ago, obviously, for corn. On soybeans, very tight situation. These were higher than what the estimates had been back on June 30th. Acreage, 91.6 million, 84.8 planted for soybeans. Here was the estimates going into the report, so more soybeans, about right on corn. Now, we've had some data released in the last couple of days from the Farm Service Agency about recordings of planted acres and those kind of things for farm programs and for crop insurance. And their numbers are significantly below these. As a matter of fact, they imply, maybe a couple of million below on both of those as the net acres. I can't believe that USDA is that far off on it. There's quite a bit of slippage in some of this FSA data. And we'll see. They claim that they're within 3% of the total. So there's a little bit of doubt on the acreage has been caused by this FSA data. We'll see how it comes out. We won't get another estimate on acreage from USDA, I think, until October. Here's the August supply and demand chart for corn. Of course, USDA increased their yield from 165, that was the trend yield for this year, to 167.4. That was smaller than what was expected. The average analyst expectation was around 170, and so this was a little bullish for corn this week. They took the crop down slightly, about 200 million bushels. They took about 200 million bushels off of carryout stocks for next year, but notice that they're still almost double where they were, 70% higher, 80% higher than they were a year ago. And so we've got some downward pressure on prices. Here's USDA's ERS's yield model that they predict the corn yield. And notice the factors that go into this. There's a constant, there's a trend variable. They say we add about 2 bushels per year. Mid-May planting progress has a small coefficient. July temperature, not a huge negative coefficient. Look at July precipitation. Big positive. Now, precipitation squared has a negative, meaning that the more you get, the less impact it has. June precipitation shortfall, pretty big positive. Notice there's nothing in there that says August. All right? It's kind of a done deal on this model, at least, once you get to the end of July. So we've got everything set up here. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't some things that can happen in August, and we're seeing them happen. I've driven around the Midwest this year quite a bit. And I can tell you that from mid-August, from southern Minnesota across Iowa, South Dakota, I've never seen anything like what we've got growing out there on both corn and beans. And one of the real points on this corn deal is these plants are not even hinting of shutting down yet. I mean, they're still just as green as they can be, pretty much all the way to the ground. And so that means that we're still filling kernels, and we're supposed to get rain in Iowa and pretty much all the Midwest this week. And that can have some real positives. Now, here's where we've been historically on yield. We've had 2 big positive deviations from the trend line in the last 20 years. 1994, 2004, so logically 2014 is going to be pretty good, huh? Lots of economics training to figure that one out. Yeah, if you're into numerology, this works really well. The point is that our crop conditions this year, if we start looking at the ratings of crop conditions so far this year, guess what the 2 years are that we go back and compare them to? 94 and 2004. Those were the ones that set the standard on crop conditions as we gone through the summer. And here's the really shocking thing. In 1994, the July trend yield estimate was 125.4. August, they added 3 to that in the August WASDE report. And look where it ended up. 29, 33, 38. It ended up 10 bushels higher than August. Here's 2004. The trend was 145. They added almost 4 in August. 49, 58, 60. They ended up adding almost 12 on that one. This year, 165.3. They added 2 in August. Kind of right in line here. I mean, I don't think this is out of the question at all. And I think 175 is certainly within shooting distance on this corn. So, bottom line, I wouldn't be buying corn yet. I think there's some downward pressure that's going to be on this corn. Unless we have it now, there's some factors that could come the other way, but it certainly looks good now. Here's one of the reasons, of course, is ethanol usage is not growing. It'll probably grow slowly over time. We're going to add a little more, especially with $95, $100 oil, and $3 corn. You're going to make more ethanol. Now, we're going to export a lot of it. We'll probably make a little more ethanol, but not anything like we saw during this past decade of growth here. So some stability there. We have some increase in feed and residual, and there's no way that we're going to increase feed usage as much as USDA has. When we have a big crop, USDA just throws a couple 100 million bushels in for residual, and that isn't there normally on a small crop, and that's kind of what they've done. But if we add them up, put the DDGS plus the corn, we're almost record high on feed availability here. So that's good for us. We're not dealing with these kinds of feed availability issues again here at this present time. On the soybean side, kind of the same story. Record soybean production, consumption, the difference is this: record high soybean stocks. And yet we still have beans at $11 plus. New crop beans are still around 10. And so, we're still dealing with that. And the main reason is just growing Chinese demand for beans. It seems like, make all you want, we'll take them. And that's kind of the way it's been so far. A lot been made about the 5 million acres more beans this year. And that's good. But half of that 5 million acres of additional beans are in these 4 states: Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska. Now, I know that we grow pretty good beans in Minnesota and Nebraska, but if I've got to count on North Dakota for a lot more beans, I'm in real trouble. All right? 1 million of those 5 million acres are in North Dakota. Okay, so that's a chunk. So I'm not quite as optimistic on bean yields as I am on corn, but still, USDA did not change the bean yield in this report. They do have carry-out stocks this year 3 times as large as the current year that we're in. Did anybody see what the August futures contract on soybean meal did yesterday? 31 up, $464. A little bit of a push going on there, you think? Exactly. And I thought we were going to do something like that. I'm surprised beans aren't doing the same thing, to be very honest, with 140 carryout. That's just minimal. You just can't get around that. But significant increase going to next year should make it a lot more comfortable kind of year. They've got bean meal in the 340 to 380 range. We could get down toward 300, but I don't think we're going to get quite there. Here's where we would be if we had the kind of deviations we had in 94 and 04 in beans. It'd be around 49. I think we'll get up a little bit from where USDA is, but not to there. Of course, one of the real problems we've had in the last couple of years is that oil hasn't carried much of the value here on this soybean value proposition, and it's had to fall on meal. The good thing is that oil is still not going to carry much of the value, all right? But the good thing is soybean oil can't go down much. This is the ratio of soybean oil to heating oil, right? And they're kind of par on energy at that line. And you don't push soybean oil down much once you get there. And so what happens when soybean prices go down if oil can't go down? Meal's going to go down. So we're going to get some help here as we go through this year. I think it's going to be good. So, summary of grains and costs. Do I think corn will be $3 and beans will be $8? No, not really. I think we're going to have some cash corn, very likely below $3 in the Midwest. I don't think corn futures will get there, but they're going to get pretty close. $3.50 and $9 are definitely in play. That'd put us around $300 a ton on meal. Key issues. It's been pretty cool in the Midwest. I mean, we've got this crop in great shape, but we could use some heat days. If it rains this weekend and turns 90 degrees for a couple of weeks, that'd be really, really good, I think, for these crops. It's been very cool. We've had a lot of days with highs in the upper 70s and lows in the 50s. So that's a little cool. Still need a little August rain. I think it's very doable. Both crops are somewhat susceptible to an early frost. They weren't real late getting planted, but they were a little late. And so if we had a mid-September frost, it would certainly damage the soybeans. Probably wouldn't damage the corn too much, but that's probably the big risk factor that's still in this market at this point. A much better scenario than we've faced in 5 years. On the cost side, it's going to be a real incentive to grow the business. It's going to be an incentive to grow the chicken business. It's been there for a year in the chicken business. They hadn't got it done. We'll talk about that. It's going to be an incentive, kind of by extension, to grow the cattle business. We'll talk about that in a bit too. So here's where we are. Implied cash prices, $3 to $4 here. That's lower than I think we'll probably kind of land over time. I think we're going to spend a lot of time in the 4s on the bean meal, around $3.50, right in the middle of these pre-2010 ranges. All right, demand. First, here's the Econ 101 lesson. If I don't show you one of these kind of drawings, they pull my Economist Union card. The change of the goods price does not change its demand. All right, we hear a lot of these. Oh, prices are so high, it's going to start destroying demand. All right, well, that's an misunderstanding what demand is. Demand is the quantities of product that a consumer is willing and able to buy at alternative prices. Okay, it's this whole set of price quantity pairs. When you change the supply of something, you don't change the demand necessarily. You might, but it's kind of a separate deal. what you do is you reduce the supply and you change the quantity demanded because you have to. There's not as much available. And so we use the price mechanism to ration the smaller supply among people who have a very much higher value of it. The ones who only value pork at this don't get to eat any anymore, okay? Because there isn't any at that price available. So this idea that we're going to hurt demand by high prices is kind of a misnomer. It's not the right concept. Demand is here. And so what we're trying to do is measure what does this demand curve do? And that's separate from supply issues. And what impacts it? Well, incomes are positively related. And more money you have, the more you spend on most goods. I guess pinto beans and bad bologna might be different. You might spend less on them if you have more income. But we call those normal goods if they're positive. Prices of substitutes are positive. Price of beef goes up. What happens to pork demand? Well, people start substituting. Demand for pork goes up. Prices of complements are negative. Theoretically, if the price of applesauce goes up, the demand for pork chops will go down. Okay? That's theoretically. In practice, when we've done the research, we don't find any of these complements that exert a real significant influence in most foods, especially in meats. And then finally, there's this thing called consumer taste and preference. It's really the underlying forces of all of those relationships. And that can be positive or negative. We've lived through the negative since the 1970s about meat demand and such. And that's the one that we're going to focus on here in just a moment. First, let's talk about incomes. More money, more quantity purchased at a given price, or a higher price for a given quantity. And we usually look at this in terms of macro, and this is GDP, which would be national income, has been growing. It's not growing robustly. 2.4% in the second quarter, about 2% in the first quarter relative to 1 year ago. You can see back in the 90s and even parts of before the recession, we had 3 and 4% growth rates. We haven't seen any of that yet. I can't say this is bad. I can't say that it's really great either. So we're hoping that that's going to improve. If we look at jobs, that's getting better. We've added a good number of jobs in the last several months. In fact, the 6 months ended in July, the best 6-month period since 2006 on increasing the number of jobs in the U.S. economy. Now, the caveat on that number is that some of those jobs aren't very good jobs. There's a pretty good amount of part-time, and we see that in a couple of places. Number one is the unemployment rate jumped just a little bit last month, mainly because the people participating in the labor force actually grew. One of the problems is we'd have very low participation rates in the labor force, and it's still very low historically, but it did grow a little bit. That's really actually an encouragement, I think, because the economy is getting strong enough that more people are looking for work. It showed up as an increase in the unemployment rate, but I'm not too worried about that. The other one I am a little concerned about is this thing called U6. It's an unemployment rate that is calculated that includes part-time and underemployed people. And that number is still pretty big at 12%. You see, it's double the regular rate of unemployment. It was 10% in 2008. It got up to over 14% at the depths of the recession. But it's still not improving very much. And so this is some concern. Unfortunately, I think we've put some structural things in the economy that really is going to keep this number higher. And one of them is the Health Care Reform Act, which actually rewards companies for putting people on a part-time basis. Though they don't have to do anything or do as much for benefits for those. So that's a concern to me as we go forward. Kind of the take-home pay variable of macroeconomics is real personal disposable income. And this is personal income after you pay your taxes deflated to a constant dollar basis. We can see that before the recession, it's pretty variable, obviously, from month to month, but it was averaging a little over 2%. Last year, it averaged 0. Okay? This year, it's been creeping up. I mean, this is a number that gets revised quite a bit. And so, like in January, the first number was 1.1%, I think. It's up to like 1.6. And so they've been kind of pushing this up, which is good. I mean, this is not robust by any stretch of the imagination, but it's darn sure better than we've been. So I think we're going to take that. I think if we're going to have really robust demand across the economy, we need to get this number back up around 2.25%. Maybe we're going there. I don't know. The only problem is this is an after-tax thing. I'm never very confident that taxes are not going to go up. So especially in this kind of environment that we're in Washington. The only thing good about that is they can't agree on anything, so probably they can't agree on that either. So, which I'm one of those that says, doing nothing is not always bad, and we need to keep that in mind. Okay, incomes. Current situation, non-hindering demand, not providing a lot of help either. Okay, let's look at prices of substitutes and complements. Of course, last year, meat prices rose by more than the CPI, meaning that relative to all the things that people buy, meat prices went up, so that should work against meat demand. Our relative price went up. We look at the species, beef lost some ground, chicken gained some ground. We were kind of in the middle. I don't think we can conclude a lot about that. But if we look at the other species now, I think we can say a few things about them. First, the broiler flock increased 4 to 5% from July through November of last year and then just kind of slammed on the brakes. They've had a lot of difficulty growing this business, and a lot of it goes back to their grandparent flocks where they've had productivity issues. They sold a lot of fertilized eggs a year ago to backfill avian influenza losses in Mexico. There's still a lot of that going on. These companies, Cobb and the other genetics suppliers, from what I understand, made some pretty large cutbacks after 2012 when they had orders canceled and such from the broiler companies. And so they haven't been able to respond very quickly. And we can see that this summer, the breeder flock just has not grown relative to a year ago. And that's kind of a surprise. I thought when we went into this 4 to 5% growth last summer that this was an industry priming itself for cheap feed. They said, boy, if we have a corn crop, we're going to have the birds ready to go. It didn't work out that way. They've had a lot of production problems. And if we look, broiler egg sets are up about 0.5% from a year ago. Now they've jumped a whole 1.5% a week here in the last 3 or 4 weeks. Broiler chick placed are almost exactly the same as a year ago. And so if you look at the ratio of those two, you can see kind of when this thing fell apart last fall. It went below the 5-year average. It stayed 2%, 1 to 2% below all of this year. And they just haven't been able to respond to this pretty golden opportunity in front of them with more output. Now, that's a good thing for us because it's left chicken prices significantly higher, maybe 10%, than what I expected them to be this year. So, think of that substitute thing. I mean, if chicken prices are higher, that's going to help demand for pork. You look at slaughter, all of the production numbers are within 1% of a year ago. Weights are almost exactly the same. So, this is an industry that hasn't responded at a time when we thought it was going to respond pretty readily, and that's been a positive for us. What does that mean? Well, here you can see their prices are very close to year-ago levels pretty much so far this year. Leg quarters had just gotten back to year-ago levels here in July and August, and of course the Russian announcement last week will probably put the hammer on leg quarter prices here at least for the next couple of months. All right, cattle. I could have put one chart up there. Notice that there's a little different time period here because virtually any chart about cattle numbers in the United States, beef cattle numbers or cattle numbers in general, looks the same. A big peak in the 70s and long downtrend since then, okay? And that's certainly what we see. This is total cattle. This is the cow inventory, and it only goes back to 1984, so it's only got this part of the chart in it. Here's the calf crop back to I guess that's, 53? Something like that. You can see it peaked in the 70s, long downtrend, and that trend has actually sped up in the last few years. Now, the reason of the speeding up is not necessarily economic. It's mainly due to weather. This business has had 10 years of drought somewhere, and it's been pretty bad in some cases. Of course, this is the situation we've gotten us into, though. With that decline in supplies, the outlook for cow-calf operations this year and next is record high, and we've seen replacements well over $2,000 a head. There's some cow-calf pairs sold for the mid-3s in Iowa this year not too long ago, $3,400, $3,500 a piece. And so a big kind of incentive here to grow the cow herd. In addition, we have a much better situation on pasture conditions. This is the percentage of pastures in poor or very poor conditions. Cattlemen are so optimistic that they measure as poor and very poor, where the rest of us measure good and excellent. But you can see relative to the long-term average, and especially this average from 2008 through 2012 has 2011, which was a severe drought in Texas and Oklahoma in it, has 2012 in it, which was a severe drought in the northern plains. I have a friend who runs a ranch in West Texas, and it's the Stanford Ranch, the Swenson Ranch at Stanford. It's a large ranch, and Dennis, the summer 2011, moved about 4,000 cows to western Nebraska. Summer 2012, guess where the drought was worst? Western Nebraska. Dennis said, "Steve, if it ever rains too much at your house, call me. I'll bring you one of my cows. It'll stop." So I have a solution there. But as we see this, one of the things we're working, though, off of this is a long-term downtrend in feeder cattle supplies. And the tightest on record in this last July. We didn't have a July report last year, so there's a missing observation. But still, very tight feeder cattle supplies that we've got to draw out of. If we look at fed steer cost, of course, that's gotten a lot better on cost of gain in the last several months. Peaked out at $130 back in early 2013, down to just over $90 in the latest data coming out of Kansas State University. And I think this number is probably going to be in the high 80s, maybe the mid 80s on cost of gain. Now, the caveat on this, though, is that's cost of gain. Cattle feeders are notorious. If they got cheap cost of gain, what do? They go throw that money at feeder cattle, and look what their total cost of production is doing over the next 6 months. So because of the cost of feeder cattle, well up in the $200 plus range, their break-evens on these cattle as we go through the winter are going to be quite high. Placements, well, we placed a few more cattle in January and February because of some dry conditions in the southern plains and poor wheat pasture conditions. They went in a little light. We've expected to kind of see them in the slaughter mix here all summer. They haven't, it doesn't look like they've showed up. They have to be there. But we've certainly been short on slaughter. But notice placements the last 4 months have been down. With that kind of feeder cattle supply and with the fact that we're pulling some heifers out of that to start building a cow herd, we think placements are going to stay below a year ago. And notice that they were the lowest for most months last year that they've been in the last 5. And we're going to be below that probably going into the fall. So this beef situation is not going to get, the supply situation is not going to get better. I think the price situation is going to stay quite positive for us for the foreseeable future. Beef production this year down 5.7%. Fed production is down about 4%. Here's the cow production, down 12% so far this year. And because of this incentive to lay cows back. You've got the same thing happening over in the dairy business, which has had record high milk prices and lower feed costs. And so they're keeping cows as well. And so we've got $3 90% Chem lean trimmings out there that probably no end to that. Beef consumption, you can scratch this word out, put beef availability, down 5% this year, another 3% next year. Probably might increase in 2016, but if it does, it's not going to be by much. So record high cutout values, weekly averages on the choice and select cutout. Choice above 260, right at 260 on select. We expected these to be 215 to 225, so you can tell how much we knew. I thought that was a ridiculously high price and a very, very shaky limb to be climbing out on, and yet it's just blown right by us. Pork prices helped early in the summer. I think that's changed. It's been kind of a codependence thing between pork and beef prices as we've gone through this year, and right now it looks to me like probably the beef is probably helping the pork prices a bit and probably will put a floor under them. So conclusions about all these demand factors. First, income slightly positive, not a big factor. Helping, but there's still a lot of uncertainty. Substitute prices have been positive, no question about that. Chicken didn't go down as far as we thought it would. Beef's been a lot higher than we thought it was, so that's very, very good. The only demand shifting factor left is consumer taste and preferences. How many of you saw this article? The cover of Time magazine telling consumers to eat butter. I didn't think I would live that long. And we got to remember that this is Time magazine. They're not necessarily our friends historically, but the article was all about how the medical and dietetic profession got this all wrong about animal fats in the 70s and 80s, and that the reaction to that, especially by substituting carbohydrates into the diet in place of these fats, is really the driver of many of the health situations we see now. And I point out, I'm a living example of some of that, no question. A couple years ago, I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. blessedly, mine has been easy to control. But it was an interesting conversation with my doctor, because when they said this, I said, well, what does this mean? And I figured, well, here it comes. You're going to tell me I don't want to eat, got to cut meat. He looked at me and said, well, you really need to control your carbs, that I wouldn't worry too much about meat. I about fell off the table. I said, really? He said, yeah. He told me, he said, I think we got it all wrong on that. He said, as a matter of fact, he said, I'm not telling you to go out and eat a lot of meat, but he said, don't worry about eating meat. And he said, watch your carbs, do some exercising. That's the part I've really failed on. But exercising is work. It's amazing how that works. But it was an interesting conversation. And then I went and talked to this dietitian, and the first thing out of her mouth was, well, we got to cut meat out of your diet and start eating chicken. I said, well, I might as well die. So, anyway, it's a major change out there, and it's been picked up in a lot of other consumer surveys. I mean, I've been talking to C.C. Snyder at the Pork Board, and they picked this up. They really started picking up last year, and we started seeing this kind of showing up in the demand calculations a year ago. Didn't know exactly what it was, but it seems like a theme that's got some legs on it now, and it's probably going to last a while, and we'll see kind of how it tries out. The other thing this really means is when you look at the demand calculations, one of the things, the conclusions I had was, here we'd gone through a year of every other month having some video come out that made us all look terrible and all those kind of things, and we all just, we got our hair on fire and we got to take care of this. And what I concluded was that consumers aren't paying any attention. Either they don't care or they don't pay any attention to that kind of stuff. They know that bacon tastes great. All right, I have these reporters calling from New York. Why are bacon prices so high? And I said, because anything is better with bacon on it. I mean, even I know the answer to that question. So, it's a major thing, and I think it's something we have to monitor, obviously, because if it starts waning, it's going to have some real implications for demand. So what we have is, we thought we were going to have this kind of reduction in supply. We made the pigs a lot bigger, so we only had that kind of reduction, but we've got this much stronger demand that has really come to play this year. And it's not showing up in per capita consumption, because consumption is not demand. Per capita consumption is down 10% since 2007. Pork is down 10%. Beef is down 17%. Chicken is down 3%, during that time period. Per capita consumption is down because it costs more to raise the animals, and people aren't going to spend that much money. I mean, price matters. But if we look what they've done, for what is available, they've been willing to pay. We've had very high prices, record high prices for beef, record high prices for pork, and notice what's happened to the white ones. A lot of difference there, isn't it? So this is not a animal protein thing. This is a red meat thing, it looks like, at least in the short run here, that we've had more response on demand for red meats. When we do the calculations, last year, chicken still had a very good year from demand index standpoint. Pork led the way, beef up, turkey up. First time in my whole data set that all four of them have been up in the same year. Okay? Big deal. This year, turkey's down fractionally. The last 12 months through June, we always run on a 12-month moving period there to catch all the seasonality. But chicken still up 3%, but all of that strength basically was last year. We look at real per capita expenditures closely related to that demand index calculation. Last year, up every month relative to the year before. This year, we're up 3% year to date. We had a bad month in January, mainly because of chicken, mainly because of weather, I think. You remember we had brutal weather on the East Coast that really had some impact, but we had some really robust growth through March, April, May, even into June. Here's beef, up 3% for the year. Here's pork, up 7%. In May, we were up almost 13% on real per capita expenditures. But look where chicken is. I mean, they've had a few good months. They had a terrible January. They just kind of rocked along, only up 0.4%. And, of course, turkey has really struggled this year. So, again, it doesn't seem to be affecting all the protein sources equally, but it's certainly been a strong point for us. On the export side, the other facet of demand we need to look at, we've had growth. Growth exports up 8% year to date. They were up fractionally. I didn't change this. May was up 6%, and now we're up about 7% year to date. I'm sorry, I didn't change that. USDA's forecast, that's the average monthly amount to meet USDA's forecast. We've exceeded that so far. I think we're going to probably struggle with that the rest of the year, especially with Russia backing out. With Russia not taking product. Now, one of the things I want to point out is this kind of green line right here. That's Russia. And notice how good a customer they've been over the years. Paul Aho says with respect to chicken that Russia is proof that some customers are so bad that you don't need them. And we kind of see this happen. Now, Russia had started taking some product, and when I did the calculations, I think between us and the Canadians, the Russians were taking about 2% of North American supplies in May and June. So that product has to find a home. It's kind of dominated by hams right now. It's the reason you've seen the ham market just fall completely out of bed this week, and there's some hams on the water, I guess, that are looking for a home. Mexico and Japan are number one markets. Japan, by far away, our number one value market. That's going to be interesting to see in the future because the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations could really have an impact there. The reason Japan is number one value is because they have a gate price mechanism. That if a product doesn't have a value over the gate price, the difference is added as a tax. So you don't send them any low-value product. Okay? But if TPP is successfully concluded, that gate price mechanism probably goes away, and almost certainly does. As a matter of fact, I don't think we're going to agree to anything that doesn't take it away. And that would open the entire world of low-value product in Japan to us that we've never been able to do before. So our average value will go down, but our tonnage could go up pretty dramatically. So that's a big deal. It could have an impact. China, on and off. Really disappointing the last 3 months. They've got plenty of pork. Their pork prices are low. They're not going to bring in some product for a while. There's questions about why it surged so much in February and March. I have some suspicions that maybe Shanghai was trying to support their initial public offering a bit with that. There are others have some other suspicions, but still, I think the long-term situation for China is going to be growth. I mean, it's still 1.3 billion times any number is a great big number, okay? And so it's a growing market, it's a growing income market, it's a growing value market, and it's a market that continues to be skeptical of the products produced in its own country. I mean, they just kind of don't have a very good record on that, and so I think Smithfield, a lot of you here in this room, have a real role in playing in this market in the future, and that means our country has a role in playing in that market. Okay, questions about demand? It's been a long time since I was that positive with hog demand, okay? Matter of fact, I'm not sure I ever was. It's 20 years of bad, and now a couple of years of really good. It's been a very, very good thing. Yes, sir? Well, based on the last 3 months, no. Okay? I mean, it's not very good. I mean, we had hoped that this growth trend right here would tilt up, and it looked like it was going, but, I mean, floor and prices? No. I don't know if you got a floor. I would always be skeptical of anybody saying there's a floor. I've fallen through the floor too many times on those kind of things. So, yeah, I mean, it helps, no question. In long term, it's going to increase the rate of growth of exports to China. I'm absolutely convinced of that because of the access to their distribution and their processing and the closeness with which the companies will work. I mean, it's just a much closer relationship. So I think it's a positive. I think it still will be a positive. I think right now there's some things going on in China that we just got to overcome. Terry? Well, the question, Terry's comment was that changing demographics is probably a factor in the demand too. Yeah, it is, Terry, and I don't study that enough, but I would argue that maybe the changing demographics actually work against us more than they work for us. I mean, because guys my age, we're in a position where we're probably going to be eating less, and I'm at the tail end of the baby boom, so there's a whole lot of people just older than me that are in that same case. My daughter has a lot of friends that don't ever eat meat. Well, ethnic trends are positive to a great degree. I mean, we have some growing minority populations, African Americans, Hispanics that like pork, so that's positive. But you still have a whole lot of us old white guys, okay? So, yeah, I could have said old fat white guys, but yeah, David. And that's going to open up somewhere where we can go to that product. That's been my argument for a week, is the market has gone down. Okay? No, I do not think that this Russian situation justifies the kind of changes we've seen in the market the last week. I think it's an emotional reaction. And look at what these markets have been all year. It's been, mention one thing and off we go, and mention another one and down we come again. I mean, it's a very volatile, emotional situation. And I attribute what's gone on the last week or so way more to emotion than I do the actual facts. This is one of those, somebody needs to look at the numbers here, because the numbers don't say that it should have done that. Okay? Of course, you can get run over by a train by standing out in front of it and yelling, "You shouldn't be here," or something like that. All right? You want to be careful of that. Okay. Hog supplies. Of course, PEDV has been the story. Let's go back to March Hogs and Pigs report. The expectations of analysts going into that report said, well, we lost some pigs. I thought these numbers this is percentage of year ago. I thought these numbers were still pretty high based on what I was seeing on the PED front. USDA came out and said, we didn't lose very many pigs at all. Just 3 or 4% here and there, not very much, of course. And I'm kind of shaking my head going, boy, I don't know where that came from. Now, they did pick up an impact on the pig crop and on litter size. But that number had been growing at 2%, and now it's down 4.5%, okay? So it's a big, or 5.5%. It's a big deal, but they sure didn't catch it in the market inventories. Here's that litter size chart. You can see the monthly data just hammered it as we went through the winter, and we know that it had some of that kind of impact. But the devil was in the details on this. When you took those USDA market herd inventories and extrapolated them out, they suggested not very large reductions in slaughter this year. Now, here's the actual for the first 2 quarters, and the third quarter so far is down 7.5%. So they didn't get that in very close at all, and it ain't going to get closer, I don't think, over the next few weeks. The implication was that higher weights, which we thought would be 3% higher at the time, would make up for that, and we'd have production as large as last year. Well, we almost do have production as large as last year, but it took 5% heavier weights to get it done. March slaughter was down almost 7%, when the inventory on the 180 and over was down only a short 5%. That didn't match, and then the September-November pig crop at the time was said to be as large as the year before, and I'm going, okay, then why aren't there more pigs coming? They've revised that pig crop down in the June report, but they didn't revise it down far enough in my mind. And then December, February pig crops in Minnesota, Iowa, and Illinois were pegged at +5, +2, and +3. And I'd been up there some in the winter, and I'd seen pictures. You don't get that many pictures of pickups full of dead pigs and end up with larger pig crops, I don't think. So I was pretty skeptical of the report. We had the PEDV case accession data, and Bob and I have talked quite a bit about this, and I don't know if I've used this right or if I should never have used it or what, but this was all we had. It was telling us kind of where the stuff is, what its activity level is. We know that case accessions don't tell us anything about the number of pigs. Doesn't really tell us anything about, other than the fact that there were positives there, and this is positive case accessions, and that what state they were in. The shaded number here, shaded area is national, read off of this scale. The lines are state by state, read off of this scale on number of case accessions per week. It's dropped, as we thought it would, as temperatures warmed up. But we had these waves. I mean, here, there's the green line here is the Oklahoma wave back in the summer. It really started impacting slaughter come December at Seaboard. We had the wave started in the Carolinas in September or so that started really impacting your numbers this spring. And then, of course, as temperatures fell, Iowa's case accessions, Minnesota's case accessions, Illinois was a little late to the game. They started rising. And those accessions, unlike these first ones in Iowa, these were in sow farms, or a good chunk of them were in sow farms. The first ones were generally not. And so we knew that there was having some losses. So how many pigs were being lost? I mean, that was a question. And early on, we had some people that were kind of keeping a tab on it. And that was pretty easy to do in Oklahoma. In North Carolina, you guys employed an interesting management concept. You talked to each other. And that was allowed some people to track that. Jesse Sumner with Prestige kind of had some of this stuff put together. And in Iowa and the Midwest, I mean, once it got there wasn't a chance of trying to keep track of it. We tried to kind of add it up on the large farms. We developed some rules of thumb on how many were lost, 2.5 to 3.5 pigs, depending on the time horizon. Some farms with lingering issues, we know they've been larger than that. So we got through February, and we had enough of this case succession data that you kind of look at it and make a little sense of it. And it finally dawned on me that, if you had a sample from a suckling pig, and I'm not a veterinarian, but if you had a sample from a suckling pig, you probably had a sample from a dead pig. Now, I concluded that from everything I was hearing. And if that's the case, then probably the death losses would at least look something like this curve as far as time distribution. So if we had a number for the total, and you could distribute it with that over time, that's what I shot at. And at the time I started, it was a little less than 50%. It got up, Bob's sample, I think, got up to 58% at one time, and then you added another system, and so I think it dropped it back down. So, but if you had 58% of the sows in the United States, 2.7 pigs per sow, you'd lost about 8.2 million pigs. Okay, and if you distribute them across time, these percentages represent that curve. Okay, with the biggest percentages being in February and March. And we make a few adjustments when we started getting into the Midwest for smaller farms. You would have lost these kind of pigs numbers. Here's slaughter from last year. We added 2.5% back in to count for death loss, put it back at a wean pig level. So here would be the losses relative to slaughter of last year during the months, which are 6-month lagged. We made some adjustments because high values were going to create an incentive to make a few culls into full value market hogs, so we thought culls would be less. We thought we would be killing a few less sows. We knew that productivity was growing at 2% to begin this thing, but as more and more herds were infected, it was going to decrease that rate of productivity growth. And so when you add all those up, this was the kind of percentage on a monthly basis, year over year, that I was coming up with slaughter losses. Now, there's a couple of caveats here. Okay, so one of them was, we don't know exactly where we would have been without this. We've probably been up plus 1 or 2. So they may overstate it a bit there. The second one is the numbers we saw this morning about PRRS losses. Bob's data is clear that PRRS was not nearly as bad this year. Part of that is biosecurity and management, and part of that is we killed them with PEDV before they had a chance to buy PRRS. Okay, so but that was pigs that would have been lost anyway that are counted in here. So there's some slippage on these numbers. Now, shortly after that, Rabobank used a similar methodology, and they came up with something that made me look like an optimist. They had 20% down in September, about 15% down in August. Now, I wasn't nearly that far along, but here's the actuals. So, for what it's worth, warts and all, these were our forecasts on percentage change. Here's actual slaughter, and here's the actual percentage changes. You can see in March and April, way larger reductions than what we'd forecast. And a lot of that was, you had a market that's going up like a rocket, so let's feed them a little longer and push them out of here and push them into future weeks. So part of that was that, no question about it. And lo and behold, when we come to May, it wasn't down near as much as what we thought. And that was kind of what was going on. Look at June, very close. July, for an economist, that's really close. August, we've had 1 week of almost 8. We had 1 week of 4.7 last week, but that was really a function of some packers taking floating holidays the previous 2 weeks and pushing a few hogs back. I think this week we're going to be 9% down. As a matter of fact, we could very well be 200,000 lower on slaughter when we get done. Through yesterday, we're about 100,000 down. If you look at how many they got scheduled for today and tomorrow, I think it's very likely we're going to be 200,000 down on slaughter at the end of this week. So that brings us to June. And June, the analysts became optimists, I guess, based on USDA's March optimism. And then USDA said, nope, there's not quite that many. They got closer. I don't think they got close enough yet. Here's where we've been on slaughter FI hog slaughter minus 6.2% since June 1. Barrels and gilts down almost 6% since June 1. Why have we not? One of the questions is the breeding herd was down on June 1, according to USDA. Why have we not grown it? With this kind of profits, $51 for this year, this is the forecast says, that number's been as much as $60 in the last month, and almost $30 for next year, forecast profits based on my model right now. Why aren't we growing the sow herd? Well, a few reasons. I think USDA probably missed a few. They had the Iowa sow herd down 30,000 on June 1. I have no idea where those sows came from. Same for Minnesota and 10,000. Texas was unchanged, even though we know Cargill was putting sows in the Texas Panhandle all during the last year. Hedges, there have been a lot of people that listened to some darn fool economists telling them to hedge June hogs at $105 because that was a good price, and I still think that was a good price. Of course, it was $30 lower, $25 lower than what they got on the cash. So some people hadn't made those kind of profits. And you can see the lag of futures-based prices behind the cash market. $30 back in May, $20 again here in June. So, so part of it is they didn't make that much money. Capital, a lot of money tied up at CME for margin calls from about February through June. So that's delayed things. That money has come back finally. The alligator theory, it's hard to remember that your job is to drain the swamp if you're up to your ass in alligators. And many of you have been that way with PEDV, no question about it. Gilt availability has become an issue and is going to have very long tails here on how we can go about expanding. We had a lot of multiplier and GP herds effect. Time, it's just been pretty quick. I mean, we haven't seen this kind of profitability for very long, and we didn't know for sure we were going to have another good corn crop. And so I'm not surprised we haven't had much expansion, but I think we will. Gilt sow slaughter is down. That would suggest we are expanding, except for we know that those positive immune sows have some real value. So we probably reduced sow slaughter a little bit because of that. Notice, though, that gilts as a percentage of the total have been pretty much normal since May. So that doesn't suggest a rapid kind of increase. Of course, weights have been the big story. They started up in the fall as Seaboard tried to make up for lost pigs and heavier pigs. That's kind of run through the whole industry. But a big factor here is feed's cheaper. I mean, we were going to take these pigs heavier anyway, probably not 5%, but still, that's one of the drivers. We look where we are now, all hogs, we've been pretty steady here the last several weeks. A slight downtrend on barrows and gilts. I think we'll get a little tighter as we try to dip into the supply a little deeper here in the next few weeks, but I look for us to be 3 or 4%, well, probably 4% higher, and set new records in the fall as we go up seasonally when cool weather and fresh corn gets here. And those pigs always eat great, and they grow really well. The cutout peaked in July. Pretty dramatic drop for both it and hog prices since then. The last 3 weeks, I think, are really more of an adjustment back to normal. I think we overcooked it in April and May. I think we overcooked it again in June and July. If you look kind of a straight line through here based on this longer-term seasonal, you should be somewhere in the mid-1 teens right now, and that's just about where we are. I'm not surprised by that going forward. But it also says that you shouldn't go from the mid-1 teens down into the 80s in the fourth quarter. So I think that the fourth quarter futures have probably been hammered way too hard recently. We've had some real big breaks on cut prices. Hams down at 106. They're down about 30% over the last 2 or 3 weeks. We had a big break on bellies 3 weeks ago. This is kind of a final. Somebody finally looked at the cold storage figures and said, geez, we got a lot of bellies in storage. We better get rid of them before we start having more hogs to kill. And I think that's exactly what's gone there. If you look at slaughter forecast, mine by quarter, I've got down about 8%. We're not too far off of that so far in the third quarter, and I think we're going to have some real challenges over the next 6 weeks. Fourth quarter down 6. I've still got us down the first 2 quarters of next year. You can see some other analysts don't have that. I don't think we're going to respond quite that quick. Now, we should grow during the third quarter because our pig losses this winter, even with PED coming back, I don't think will be nearly as large. I think Bob thinks that maybe they'll be a third as large. Is that your educated guess, Bob? I'll take 50%. You can take a third, and we'll see what happens. Okay? So we're not going to lose as many this year as we did last year. We've got some more immune herds. We don't have as many susceptible. We know better. We know some things. So we could get a little growth in the third and fourth quarter. Here's weekly forecast. Mine are in red. USDA's numbers would be in black. And you can see recently they've been pretty close to my numbers. Price forecast, we want to forget this third quarter one right here. That's too high. We're not going to get there. We're probably going to be in the 115 to 120 range. But I still think we could still get close to this dollar here in the fourth quarter. The futures are now down about 192, and I believe all of these futures out here have been overcooked by this really kind of too large a correction. I wouldn't be booking any hogs at these kind of prices right now. I'd wait. So what do I expect? Well, low costs relative to 10 through 13, except for drought years. I mean, we're not going to have very big carryouts. So if we draw a 2012 drought, we're going to see expensive feed. Corn, I think you're going to see a lot of corn, $4 to $5. Some 3s. On a drought year, we'll see 6s, maybe bumping a 7. I don't think we'll see 8 again because I don't think we're going to get that tight, and we're not increasing ethanol usage like we were then. Meal, $300 to $400 with some topside risks just because of world demand. My ISU cost model, and I put old there because we're going to, Dr. Lee Schultz at Iowa State has revamped this, and I'm going to start using his new parameters here pretty soon, but I haven't got it done yet. But somewhere in the $70 to $80 carcass range, we're going to see a lot of those. And that means eventually we're going to see a lot of hog prices between $70 and $80 in carcass. It's not going to happen very quick, which is good for you, but I think that's going to come. Demand will stay strong barring an export disruption or major food safety event. I wrote that several weeks ago, and I bolded it this week because within 3 weeks we've got the Russian export disruption. These things happen. This one's not very major, but throw a Japanese one in there or something, or a Mexican one, which we could get some tariffs out of the Mexicans before the next year is over, based on country of origin labeling. That could have a problem. Positive views of protein and animal fats. Looks like it has some legs. Beef prices are going to stay high through 2016. That's going to be quite positive for us. Exports growing, but at a slower rate than they have. I think the breeding herd is going to grow slowly this fall. I wouldn't be surprised in the September report to see +1, +1.5. I don't think there's a lot. I'm hearing a lot of talk about things going, but they're mainly in the building stages. So we don't have animals involved yet. A lot of building going on. Regardless of PEDV, I could see 3 to 4% on the breeding herd next year. I think there's a lot of incentives to do it, with sighting challenges being a roadblock in some cases. 2015 and beyond obviously depends heavily on vaccines and management and PEDV prevalence. Weights stay high until space is tight, and maybe from now on. I mean, we're not going to take all of this weight back off these hogs. At some point, we'll fill up the spaces again, and at that point, we've got to decide, okay, do we leave them heavy and build some more barns, or do we cut it back to fit our barns and push more hogs through? That's going to be a decision, and my guess is it's going to fall on the side of, especially if we have grain in this kind of range, it's going to fall on the side of putting more space in. A potential mess in 2016. 3 to 4% more sows. If we go back to 2% growth on litter size, if we got pigs that are 3 or 4% higher, heavier, we get to the fall of 2016, we got a lot of pork, and we probably don't have enough packing spaces to kill them all. So you need to realize that this could be a mess out there not too far away.